Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Maria Kamburi, and I'm Associate Professor at the Department of Psychology and Human Development, UCL Institute of Education, and also a collaborator on the UCL-Penn Global COVID study. I'm also the PI of the UCL Changemakers, which began when I was a departmental graduate tutor. I've always been passionate about well-being and mental health of doctoral students, and this is what we're focusing on today. We know from the registration that attendees today are turning in from over 20 countries, which is amazing, and that some of you have taken part in this study. Thank you so much, and very, very welcome to all. And welcome to our alumni, who we've seen there, some of our alumni who are always following our work. And to the rest of you who are joining us today, a very, very warm welcome. Briefly, this study is a longitudinal survey looking at the impact of COVID-19 on mental health, physical health, and relationships. And today we're thrilled to present some of this data to you as the 4th out of 5 series of webinars. So the webinars follow a 3-part format. A 25-minute presentation from our study team, followed by a 20-minute commentary from a discussant with expertise in clinical or policy, and I'll tell you who it is today. And then finally, we'll end with Q&A, as Carrie said, from you, and from about 6 onwards, or whenever the speeches are finished. And I'd like to also say that the series is sponsored by the UCL Global Engagement Fund. The goal of the series is really for us to share our study findings with the public and invite critique and comments from you, the audience, including leading experts in industry, clinical practice, policy, and public health. So thank you very much, all of you, for that. And you'll find the schedule for our final talk, the 5th one, in the chat. Today, we're very happy to introduce a special guest from the World Bank, and she is going to be the discussant of the study findings, Dr. Tara Betay. Tara is a senior economist with the education practice and the World Bank's East Asia Pacific team, currently based in Laos, PDR. She joined the World Bank in 2010 through the Young Professionals Program and has since worked in South Asia region, Independent Evaluation Group, World Development Report 2018, and now she's working on East Asia and the Pacific. She's also the World Bank's Global Leader on Teachers. She holds a PhD in Economics of Education from Stanford University, where she was also a postdoc fellow. Her research interests span teacher labor markets, politics of education reform, and higher education, topics on which she has published in journals such as Proceedings on the National Academy of Sciences and Nature, Human Behavior, as well as World Bank reports and chapters in book volumes. Next, we have our study team members. I'd like to introduce Dr. Dora Kokosi. Dora recently finished her PhD studies at the Department of Psychology and Human Development at UCL Institute of Education. And she's now working as a research fellow in statistics at UCL Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health. Her current research focuses on the generation and evaluation of synthetic data using administrative databases from the UK databases. And previously, her PhD focused on the role of inflammation in the association between socioeconomic disadvantage and child cognitive development. Parallel with her doctoral studies, she has also worked as a research assistant in projects that explored the prospective relationships between air pollution, child development, inflammation, and mental health using large-scale cohort studies. And along with her other co-investigators from the UCL Changemakers Better Together team, she investigates the well-being and mental health of doctoral students, which aims to address challenges at the institutional level and help policymakers and other academic communities to support students effectively. And our other speaker is Dr. Jana Brinkert Like Dora, Jana recently completed her PhD at the Department of Psychology and Human Development, UCL. I want to congratulate both of them because this is probably their first presentation since they've graduated. As part of her PhD at the Center for Research in Autism and Education, she investigated attentional aspects and visual processing of information in autistic and non-autistic people. There are several challenges and strengths associated with attention in autism. Throughout her PhD, Jana looked at finding ways to harness autistic people's attentional processes. She used a range of different neuroscientific methodologies to assess group differences and tested the feasibility of an intervention study. She will continue her work as postdoc research associate at UCL in Cray. And Jana is also passionate about mental health, and that's how she got involved with the Better Together project. And that's the focus of today's webinar. Sorry, I have to also mention Vasilis. Vasilis Sideropoulos, of course, is another part of our team who is here today and who is the technician in our department, but is a research collaborator to many other research projects, and particularly the ones around COVID that deal with mental health issues. So Vasilis is probably going to join in the Q&A as well later on and helping out. Thank you. So Dora or Jana?
Thank you very much for the introduction, Maria. It's been a great opportunity to be able to study doctoral students' mental health issues, and it was a great opportunity to join the bigger COVID-19 study led by Dr. Kerry Wong, so we can look at the larger and more diverse sample, the issues related to mental health, to doctoral students' well-being and mental health. So Maria already mentioned a few things about the study, but just to give you an overview of the team. So we are the UCL Better Together team, and we joined the bigger COVID-19 global study on social trust and mental health. And the rationale behind that was that there is a lot of discussion around doctoral students' mental health. And let's start by defining mental health. So when people think of mental health, they think of mental ill health and non-mental health as a state of well-being. So the World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So it is important to note that our mental health tends to fluctuate and change over time and depending on what is going on in our lives. So therefore, it's not surprising that mental health changed for many of us during the onset of the pandemic. And generally, 1 in 3 people will suffer from mental health difficulties at some point in their lives. So it is also important to note that certain societal subgroups are at a higher risk for experiencing psychological distress than others. For instance, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and religion are some of the factors that can determine the risk for experiencing psychological distress. And those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds or from certain professional groups, such as doctoral students in that case, are more affected than others. Previous studies have already showed that students at all levels suffer from several mental health issues. For example, in this study from Biter and colleagues in 2015, they showed that undergraduate students suffer from severe to extremely severe levels of stress. So that was 11% of the sample. Another more recent study by Evans and colleagues showed that graduate students, 90% of them were doctoral students, suffered from moderate to severe rates of anxiety, and depression. So it's really important that that we see that rates for anxiety and depression were 6 times higher than the general population. One way to look at the mental health is through the educational and ecological framework. So at the macro level, we have institution structure. So I will be showing you 3 levels of this framework that provide the holistic approach to explaining mental health issues of doctoral students. So at the first level, we have the institution structure. This can be institutions policies such as workload and active participation in the academic community. Then at the meso level, we have interactions with peer and friends. Very important is the relationships between the students and their supervisors, as well as their workplace culture, educational settings, and other work-related issues. And we know that, for example, doctoral students may experience both high workload and peer pressure. So exposure to such stressful environments can lead to mental health problems, with anxiety and depression being the 2 most commonly diagnosed disorders in the doctoral community. Then at the micro level, we have several individual socioeconomic factors which are related to socioeconomic status, health status, age and gender and ethnicity play an important role, as we discussed earlier. And all these adversities can increase combining all these levels together. Interestingly, a great percentage of doctoral students report that poor well-being peaked during the sophomore year of the academic training. So again, academic level also might play an important role. Over to you, Jana.
Great, thank you so much, Dora. Yeah, I just want to carry on and explore the context of doing a PhD a little bit more. There was a survey that was conducted in 2019 before the onset of the pandemic, and that was conducted by the Nature Graduate Survey with over 6,300 respondents across the world, and that was looking at kind of mental health, but also the larger context of PhD students' well-being. So when PhD students were asked about how satisfied they were after joining the PhD program, about 45% of the respondents said that they actually had worse satisfaction overall, and 42% that their satisfaction increased. So we see a very much of a divided picture there. And then when looking at what students actually enjoyed while doing a PhD, most students said they enjoyed the intellectual challenge of doing a PhD, about 38%, and then also working with bright and interesting people. But what was actually really sad was that students said they were less optimistic about career opportunities, and only 1% of the students said that they had a fulfilled social life or satisfying social life, which is paints a very bleak picture, I think, of PhD life overall, and that was pre-pandemic. So it's probably not surprising if people said that they only have, or 1% of the respondents said that they enjoyed their social life, because most of, or 3/4 of the survey of the students said they worked extreme hours, really long hours, and it was also very much a cultural demand, or 50% of the, almost 50% of the respondents said that universities kind of called for these long working hours. And it was actually when students received support, the support wasn't always adequate, and about 36% of the respondents, so the PhD students who then received help for anxiety and depression, they were related to PhD-related stresses, and about 18% of those who received support said that actually they did not feel that the university provided the adequate support. And I think it's really important to note also that PhDs vary a lot. So in terms of the content, the field that we're studying, but also the methodology, the research question, whether there's funding for the students, and also the supervisor relationship. But yet we still see that a lot of students are struggling with mental health. And therefore we decided to explore this a bit further. And that's where we conducted, so we received some funding, but then we conducted the survey as the pandemic started with Carrie and her team, and looked at students' well-being and mental health. So that was part of, so when students said in the survey that they were doctoral students, they received additional questions to answer. And we were then looking at 3 waves. That started in April last year, so right after the beginning of the pandemic. And the next wave then followed over the summer, over the autumn and winter time, sorry. And then the last wave is not quite completed yet. So we be focusing on wave 1 and wave 2 throughout this talk. And very much the aims of the study, we're looking at measuring people's depression and anxiety throughout this research, but also looking at students across the field. So now I'm handing back over to Dora, who's talking about the study details.
Thank you, Jana. So now we'll talk you through the measures we use to explore students' mental health, and I will explain the study sample and what we found. So first, we use standardized tests to measure mental health and cognitive and behavioral skills of the students. So we used 2 tests. The one was the Pacing Health Questionnaire that measured depression, and the other one was a generalized anxiety question that measured anxiety. So the study sample, in the first wave, we had 264 doctoral students participating, and in wave 2, this number slightly decreased to 180, but this was normal due to the dropout of the survey, which is expected in this kind of surveys. In the sample, we also had several undergraduate and master students joining, and these were approximately 100 across the 2 waves. Okay, so here we're looking at some demographic characteristics of the sample. These are the doctoral students. So we can see that females were more than males in the sample, so about twice the size. The mean age of the participants were 29 years, and the age range was between 22 to 69 years, which is amazing. As for the ethnicity of the participants, we can see that we have a diverse sample. However, the white group was predominantly larger than the rest of the ethnic groups. As for the doctoral characteristics, so we measured some variables that looked at the study mode, whether they're receiving funding, the year of the PhD, and how much COVID and whether COVID had impacted their PhD. So the majority of the students were full-time. However, more than half of them were self-funded, so only 19% had received funding to do their studies, which is very important, as we will see later. As for the years of studies, most of them were first-year students. However, the majority of them, 60% of them, said that COVID really impacted their PhD. So now we'll show you some of the results we have. So we compared depression and anxiety levels between PhD students and the general population in the sample. From both waves, we saw that PhD students scored higher on depression and anxiety, and that was again in both waves. And here you can see the differences in the mean scores between the two samples. We also wanted to see whether there's a difference among students at different levels. So we compared undergraduate, postgraduate, by that I mean master's students, and graduate PhD students. So from the comparisons we did, we found that, first of all, undergraduate students had higher scores on depression, anxiety, stress, and loneliness than master's students. And at the same time, undergraduate and PhD students scored similarly on the well-being and mental health scale. So by that, I mean that undergraduate and PhD students had similarly high levels of depression and anxiety and stress and loneliness compared to the master students, which highlights the difficulties that students experienced during the pandemic, irrespective of their educational level. So we don't only expect to see doctoral students to suffer, but here we see that undergrads suffer a lot as well. And now over to you, Jana, for the thematic analysis results.
Yep, sure. So we also collected some qualitative data, and so that was open-ended questions that we asked PhD students to complete, because we really wanted to find out about PhD students' experiences overall, given that so many students have suffered in the past from mental health difficulties before. So we collect, I'm just focusing on actually wave one qualitative data, and we worked as a team to analyze the data. We conducted a reflexive thematic analysis, and I think also one of our helpers is in the audience today, so big shout out to Josephine, who helped us to complete the analysis, and she's also a former student at UCL. And so what we did was we looked for patterns, so that's a thematic analysis where you look for patterns and themes that emerge within the data. And we had three major themes that emerged, and I'm just going to talk about all three themes in more detail and give you a few quotes to illustrate them. But just very broadly, we looked at adjustments to the academic work to suit the new circumstances of being in a pandemic. So this is just the first wave when everyone was very much still in lockdown, and universities were still closed, and labs were shut, and libraries were closed as well. So then the second theme was also the personal impact and the isolation of working from home. And the last theme was the uncertainty that students have found difficult, especially when it came to finances and voice about the future. So now move to the first theme, so the academic situation. As I said earlier, a lot of universities closed their labs, and it made it really difficult for students to carry on proceeding with ongoing research projects. And as I also said, a lot of students have done very different research projects. So for instance, one student had said, my research has completely stopped. I require laboratory space, and this has not been possible. There's virtually nothing I have been able to do from home. I feel COVID-19 has severely impacted my PhD work. So that really illustrates the frustration of not being able to go into the work. But then also a lot of students have, for instance, said no conducive space to work, no access to physical books in the library. So also firstly, the inability to effectively work from home, or not even having a workspace, but then also work that had to stop because there's no way of actually carrying on with the work. And then also student had said there's a lot of uncertainty regarding the data collection, whether PhD plans needed to be changed as a result of COVID-19. So a lot of students were kind of in this limbo as it was, as to we didn't know how long the pandemic would go on for, and so that really reflects in the theme. And then another student had also said getting a rejection for a manuscript during COVID-19, and therefore not being able to improve the manuscript properly and being able to take it through, talk it through with my colleagues, as well as I could do in the lab. So that's very much showing that students were really relying on the social and peer contact that they couldn't do as they would normally have done, maybe in an office environment. And then we also have the personal impact, where students have reported that, for instance, also it's been difficult to focus on reading and writing because of the impact the stress of the pandemic is having on mental health. And then external pressures, for instance, my supervisor expecting me to be more productive during this time, and I struggle to focus. So very much that divide between trying to be productive, but also external pressures. And then the isolation as well. COVID-19 has made a mess of things. I'm now trapped in my room 24/7, writing a thesis. I do not want to write with no other outlet away from friends and family. So very much that isolation and finding it difficult to work from home and being isolated and not maybe even be able to have a normal social life as they might have had before. And this is all about uncertainty. And as I said earlier, the financial struggles. It is getting more stressful now that the funding is uncertain. I cannot work as effectively as I need to. And then being an international student, I cannot get my degree extended, even if I did. No one can financially support me, which further increases the stress. So yeah, those are all really real difficulties for students. Some of them have been addressed by universities in the meantime, but just so that we can conclude our talk, as we said earlier, so PhD students very much showed that they had suffered with mental health difficulties prior to the pandemic, but also throughout the pandemic. And when we looked at undergraduate and doctoral students, they seem to be suffering the most from mental health difficulties. And as we just looked at the qualitative data, you know, redesigning surveys and research designs and social distancing restrictions have made it really difficult for a lot of students. And then also lack of support and maybe the peer support system that students would have normally had. Then some take-home messages. Dora, do you want to do them?
So from the exploratory analysis we did and from previous studies and our study now, what are really the takeaway messages and what's really important to do from now on? So first of all, we learned and actually confirmed again that the COVID-19 pandemic had a unique impact on doctoral students' mental health. So it's really important to raise awareness of the mental health difficulties that students go through. And this is not only, this is also comes from us as well. So personally, I could relate to all these problems, and as a student, when I participated in the study, I could really tell what the problems were. So that also highlights the need to introduce preventative measures for students' mental health. So further research is needed to understand their well-being using longitudinal data. This one was a great start, but now we need more data to understand the impact the pandemic had on students in the long term. Also, it's really important to provide students a greater certainty, especially under those difficult circumstances, which would be access to financial support, peer support systems. Also, it's really important to communicate clearly and openly between the lab members, with supervisors. Also, students' research need more support. So data, participant recruitment in the university needs to provide the support, and all these could alleviate mental health difficulties. So I think these findings highlight the importance that doctoral students and students in general at the higher education need, and we're very happy to take any questions and discuss further the topic with you. Thank you very much. Please feel free to follow us on Twitter and post your questions here, or raise your hands and engage in conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, guys. That was really interesting, and I think we've got some data, and I bet there will be some questions coming up. But before that, I'd like to introduce Tara, who is going to discuss the presentation and the topic, and take it further into a more global arena. Tara.
Thanks so much, Maria. Thank you everyone for being here, and thanks for inviting me to be a discussant. I want to congratulate Jana, Dora, Vasilis, and the entire team behind the study. It is really a lot of fascinating information and data that you've managed to collect at a time when it's not been very easy to collect data. So once again, congratulations and thank you for doing this study. So let me begin by saying that I need hardly emphasize how important this study is and how important it is for us to understand what research students and graduate students are going through. Earlier in the day today, I took a quick look at the team behind the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And there are so many doctoral students and research assistants there that it's quite clear that without the contribution of these people, we would not have this vaccine today that is helping people across countries. And one can only think that if most of these students were very stressed, then how they would have been able to perform and deliver such an important piece of work. So let me then go now to work that is closer to what I've been doing, which is looking at how teachers have been responding to the pandemic. As has been pointed out, not doctoral students, graduate students are generally under high levels of stress, but the pandemic has made it much worse. And this is very similar to what we have seen with teachers across the world. And why have teachers been feeling stressed, one might ask, because they haven't been teaching daily. They don't have to face the trouble of being in class and facing difficult situations. But there have been many reasons for this. One is, of course, just the uncertainty of whether their job is going to be preserved. The second is feeling completely ineffective and worrying about how they can reach and help their students. The third is feeling completely technologically unprepared for the changes that they're expected to do, not feeling supported by the system. And some of these are not very dissimilar from what doctoral students and graduate students are likely to have been facing. And what I thought I could spend a few minutes on, perhaps, is discussing what we can do next to help these students to reduce their levels of stress. And I have three main principles or takeaways that we could use. The first is to help support student resilience during this time. And for this to happen, there are three kinds of things that we might need. One is to support them financially, to be able to guarantee that their finances or whatever support they have been provided that is not taken away. That's so important. And universities are usually well-funded and have a mechanism to do this. The second is to be able to provide them with resources to help manage their mental health. So free webinars, for instance, on managing anxieties, techniques to reduce stress. And just going back to the world of teachers, there are countries which have started having educational TV channels which begin with stress management techniques. So the first 5 to 10 minutes are focused on stress management techniques. And to be able to have this more easily accessible and available to students, as well as help on a number of other related issues, such as how do you manage if you are a caregiver to young children at the same time as you have to do your dissertation, your doctoral work. So to have these resources easily accessible to students, and alongside the resources on managing their mental health, of course, to have resources that help answer all the questions they might have with regard to their physical health. and with regard to the pandemic, what we know, what is the latest state of knowledge. Of course, right now we know quite a bit more than we did last year this time, but our knowledge keeps increasing, and to have this information readily and easily accessible on the university's website to students would be really helpful. And the third is to have counseling services available to students, for them to be able to call a number and know that they will receive a professionally trained person at the other end who can help them think through some of the problems that they are facing and provide them with strategies, as well as repeated, if needed, counseling and follow-up. So that's the first bit, to help improve student resilience. The second is to help improve students' own professional abilities. You know, when I was doing my doctoral research, I hardly ever had time to prepare for things like how to do a job interview, how to improve my, soft skills, and how to do better time management and those kinds of things. But now there are a range of these kinds of offerings on online websites like Coursera, for instance, which teach you how to do all those other things that you just frankly don't have time to do when you're doing your day-to-day research. So to be able to provide free access to students so they can help build their skills when they, will not, whether they're going on to the academic job market or another job market. This would be really useful, and it's something that you sometimes just don't find the time to do otherwise. The third kind of thing is relatively simple, and that is just helping students with technology. Internet packages, they do cost, and to be able to subsidize this for students, because this is frankly the only way they are in touch with the world, with their parents, with their social communities. It's actually not very expensive. And there are many cases where online providers of these services tie up with, at least in the case of the school education system, with school systems to be able to provide teachers top-ups. And this is something that can totally be done with universities collaborating or partnering with internet providers. So I would say these three sets of things are absolutely essential. They're very basic. They aren't very expensive, and they can be done quite easily. So just to repeat, the first is to help build student resilience through this time. And for this, first to be able to support and make them feel confident about the financial security of the process. The second, providing them resources, including those related to mental health and information. The third is immediate counseling services through phone calls where they can speak to someone repeatedly. The second is to help them just build up their professional capacity through taking these online courses on becoming better at when you actually have to enter the non-PhD world. And the third is through technological support. So these would be the three things that I think could help us. And my last set of points is in terms of other areas that I think would be very interesting to look at in the data, and it's possible that you have already begun doing this, which is to understand a little bit how the effects have varied by gender, how the effects have varied by age group. Again, coming back to my own personal experience as a graduate student, as a female graduate student in my late 20s, if I had to take a pause like this in my, long-term horizon or career, it would have been stressful, because many of us are thinking about, the things like how are we going to manage our life outside of our work? Some of us might want to get, move on, have children, and all of these things put pauses on that. So it would be useful to see whether there are different stress levels by gender, for instance, just because again, going back to my personal experience of me and my female members of my cohort, they worried about things which sometimes did vary by gender, just because that's how it was. Then to see whether things vary by ethnicity. I think you have already hinted that international students have more problems because they don't get guarantees of continuing to be registered in the university. In the US, where I was for a long time, there's many students lose housing, which is just so important, because if you lose housing and you lose many things, then you lose your visa status, and then you have to go back home, but there are no flights to take you back home. So there are lots of challenges there. I think it would be interesting to look at these two things in greater detail, and to have a frank discussion around them, because there are interesting things here. One of the interesting and some sort of unexpected things that I learned when I was looking at the school education literature in the US that is beginning to come out of the pandemic is that many parents of African-American students felt that this online mechanism worked better for them because there was less discrimination inside the classroom. Young students felt there was less body language that was discriminating against them. This was a more, in a sense, a more, kept them immune, protected from that kind of thing. And it also helped, there's less bullying that was happening on these kinds of, when education was happening through an online mechanism. Of course, there is cyberbullying that happens, but in the particular context of this study, what I found interesting was that these parents felt that there's not, my children are not having to feel less, or are not being made to feel any less than other children, because there are online teaching just works differently. So these are just some things to think about. And once again, thank you so much. This has been a really very interesting set of presentations that was made just now, and I look forward to the questions that you might have and hearing. I will have to leave in about 12 to 15 minutes. So if there are, Maria, if it's all right with you, if there are any questions specifically for me, then perhaps, if you think it's all right.
Yes, thank you, Tara. Definitely, we'll take some questions. Please put the questions in the text now for Tara first, possibly, and then so she can answer them. It is quite late where she is. And thank you very much, Tara, for summarizing these issues. It is definitely true that at best of times, doctoral students suffer. This was just an extra load that was definitely not needed. But at the same time, we found that really it is important that we tackle it now. It's a good opportunity, if you like, because it became the glass overflowed. It was really absolutely too much to deal with. So, are there any specific questions? And I know Carrie also would like to talk about a social media challenge that while I'm waiting for the questions to accumulate, a social media challenge that we ran, which was inviting everyone to submit a photograph of how they've been coping with the pandemic. And we're happy to say that Rachel So has won the gift voucher that was going of £10 Amazon gift voucher for her photo of her dog that has helped her cope with being overwhelmed and stressed over schoolwork and general problems that she had at the time. So yeah, there's always good to have a pal there.
And as I think questions are slowly rolling in, I just wanted to flag our next social media challenge for the final webinar series is going to be what good habits will you continue to do post-COVID? So there will be a final webinar in 2 weeks' time where I'll be presenting. But back to Maria now, as I think questions are coming through.
Yeah, I think I can see one question here by Debbie. How can we raise more alarm about the difficulties students face during the pandemic? The libraries are unreached and writing thesis from home is more stressful. The tuition fees not reduced. And this is probably talking more about undergraduate, but it doesn't matter. As we said, the differences were small. What can be done to tackle this problem beyond this platform? But perhaps Tara, you could answer that. I mean, you already did partly talk about it.
This is something that in a university, the management of the university has to take seriously. The administration of the university has to take seriously. and you can raise more awareness about it through social media posts, but I find it hard to believe that the administration in a good or even a reasonable university would not be aware of these stresses. The bit about increasing tuitions, I don't know what to say there, because it seems quite unacceptable to be in a situation like that. It's fortunately not happening in many universities, but it's possible that it's happening in some. In terms of library access, yes, it's very difficult, especially if you rely upon books that you cannot get online versions of. And unfortunately, there's probably not much one could have done a few months ago, but I hope that going forward, as more people get vaccinated and becomes a little bit easier to open up some of these resources in a selective way so that not everybody goes in at the same time, but you book a slot and a few people go in, get their books and come out. I hope things like that are designed in universities to help students. I do hope that happens, and I think it will begin to happen if it hasn't already. The fact is that we might have to again close down, right? And there has to be some way in which one can protect students and find mechanisms again of being able to allow them to access these resources.
Thank you, Tara. Dora or Jana, do you have any? Yeah.
Getting support from the university as a whole institution is very important. But I also would like to comment on a previous point that Tara made and her suggestion. And first of all, I would like to thank her for her suggestion, and we're planning to take this research forward. What you said about looking at gender differences as well as age groups and ethnic groups as well is really important. I can only share with you a few bits of a research paper that's now under preparation. And it's really interesting to see that age didn't really play an important role in predicting mental health issues. There were some differences in ethnic groups. However, these were explained, and by that I mean this was not significant anymore when we took into account how well students cope, for example, or whether they can focus on their job. So this is really important to look at, but as an initial finding, we didn't see any age differences. But yeah, your suggestions were very important, and we're going to look at it further.
I also wanted to add something really briefly to the previous point about libraries. So for instance, I know at UCL, I needed a book that was not available online. And I contacted the university and they had a scanning service, and it was extremely quick and with really high quality. So maybe that's something also worth exploring or raising at the university. That's still an issue, because I know that UCL have been amazing, at least in like autumn time last year, and they had come back really quickly to me about
yeah, I think we're lucky that we are in some universities that have better resources than others, and I'm sure Tara would share that this is not happening everywhere in the world, unfortunately, but in some areas better than others. And I do share your points about resilience building and confidence building, absolutely, because our students need even more confidence now to tackle these difficult situations that come. And yes, technology support, that would be great, because it's another small, but definitely it adds to the pile of what we can do. There is another question here. Any ideas on the effectiveness of putting together social groups, for instance, to help with the loneliness of working at home from the point of view of doctoral students, or else to just talk with others who share similar experiences?
I will now speak from a student's perspective. So because I recently graduated, so I experienced the pandemic as a PhD student, and I can totally relate to what you're saying here, Elle, about feeling lonely during the studies, and the need of belonging into social groups is really important. So I think because we see that belonging to a research lab is really important, because there you can share your experiences with other doctoral students, especially when you have similar topics, you can talk more easily with each other, do problem solving as well. So it's really important. And for that reason, it's also important from the departments to create groups for students who don't belong in research labs, because those tend to be more isolated than the others. So I think that's another thing to highlight from here. As the department, and Maria started this with the beginning of the pandemic, and then also Emily Miduhas took over as a new departmental graduate tutor. We tend to have tea breaks and coffee breaks where we can chat all together. However, this is not always enough, because we need more closeness and have more and be able to share all the experiences together. So I think it's really important to start this sooner than later.
Yeah, well, my experience has also been that this year we've started certainly with the education doctorate, where I teach, which is a professional doctorate. The students were on a WhatsApp group right from the beginning, so they were able to help each other. That we always break them into groups in any case. This is part of our pedagogy, but because they had never met, they actually didn't meet the whole year, which is quite unusual. They managed to then split into smaller groups, but that's organic, and you need to allow it for it to happen. But once the university provides the beginning, I think the rest usually follows. But as you say, Dora, this is really important that we continue, and we hope that the Better Together scheme is going to come up with other ideas of how to do that and suggest it to other departments and so on, showing how successful social groups can be, and definitely they can be. Any other? Yes.
If I may just come in there with this is an example from teachers in South Africa, but it's quite interesting. There was an experiment between seeing how virtual coaching worked versus real life coaching. And it turned out that there wasn't a lot of difference in terms of impact on teacher performance. With virtual coaching, what was interesting was because these teachers had never actually met these coaches, they didn't know them socially, they felt less inhibited when it came to expressing or voicing their troubles and their concerns. So in a sense, if they knew somebody face to face and they had some kind of social relationship with that person outside of just a coaching relationship, which often happens in smaller communities, then they felt more inhibited. But when it was this kind of virtual relationship, it was, so to say, more, I can't find the right word, but more objective, clear. You could voice whatever you wanted to without worrying about being judged. So that's also an interesting thing to think about. There is evidence on structured peer support groups, structured WhatsApp groups that have been found to be effective in the particular example that I know comes from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where there is hard impact evaluation evidence for these groups helping performance.
So these are part of the project that the World Bank is currently engaged. There's a question on that for you, whether this is whether this is part of the projects that you are involved in to do with COVID?
So the research that I just spoke about the DRC, yes, the World Bank has been involved in that. The other work on South Africa, we haven't directly been financing that, but it's part of our research work. So we've learned about that. And in terms of our other work, we are in our projects, we are trying to build in ways of building teacher resilience. For instance, when looking at teachers, that has begun to happen more than before. We've always known that teaching is a very stressful profession, especially if it's school. I mean, it's at every level, but perhaps more at the school level, because there's often very, very little support for teachers. But we're looking at it more and more in our projects now, how to build this kind of resilience, especially, you know, with COVID, as well as the technology bit, building that.
Is there a particular place that we should be looking at, Tara? Is there a sort of a link that you could send? Is it, or is it just anywhere in the World Bank website?
The education site on the World Bank, I can't remember the exact URL, but if you were to Google Education World Bank, you would get to that link. And within that, you would see some of the work that's been done. And, you know, the way I often go about it, because the bank does work in, you know, nearly 100 countries, is I Google, for instance, Kenya World Bank teachers, and the project will come up, and then you can look through the project documents. It's all available online, and then you can see what kind of activities are being funded.
Great.
Or World Bank Higher Education, Ghana, you could get all that information.
Okay, that would be really useful. We can keep an eye. There seems to be a question, Tara. I really appreciate the fact that you touched upon teachers' well-being. I am about to start my PhD this year, and my topic focuses on anxiety in pre-service teachers of English. I was wondering if you could suggest ways on how trainees on intensive teacher training courses can manage their anxieties, and how tutors could support them throughout their learning journey. I would like to point out that I feel that pressure as a trainee very much, apparently irrespective of the pandemic, she says.
Yes. You know, I think some of this we are still learning a little bit about, to tell you the truth. On a pre-service especially is an area that we have not actually engaged in as much as we should have, and to understand the stress of that, because and the stress here is very real, because there are a lot of expectations from teachers who are from students who are in pre-service, and very often they're not given the kind of, you know, real world experience that they need. And there's always the worry that they will be, so to say, dumped in a school, and then they will have absolutely no support there. So it is definitely stressful. I think, you know, the general strategies that one has for anxiety management would work well anywhere. And these should be a part of preschool, pre-service curricula. The other thing that's important, I would say, in pre-service curricula very much, is to make teachers technologically ready. You know, I'm not sure if this applies to the context or country where you are in, but what we have seen is that countries and places where teachers were able to adapt to technology were able to do much better. They were much more effective than in places where they just felt that they didn't know what to do, and they just could make no progress on that.
Yeah, this is a really good point. But also, I think you're right to say this is usually managed within the teams of teacher training courses quite well, because these anxieties, as you say, they're there irrespective of the pandemic. So I know that you know, the NQTs that, you know, come and train at the Institute of Education, they have these smaller groups, as I mentioned them. They could even be, you know, as small as the WhatsApp, but also with their tutors, and they're broken down into smaller groups, and they meet. Well, they e-meet now, or some of them have been able to start meeting as well, just to be able to have that contact throughout the training, because it's hugely important to keep in touch, to actually keep the social contact, even if it's online, but just to keep in touch fairly regularly, weekly. And I think has proven really successful in what I've seen. So thank you for that, and thank you, Tara. I know your time is sort of valuable, and it's in the middle of the night. So thank you so much for joining us. We've got a couple more questions, but they're more specific to the team for the samples of the data that they were discussing before. So you're very welcome to stay, but I could take a couple of those.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for coming. And I hope all these projects become quite successful, and we'll hear more about them, the education side of World Bank projects and COVID. Thank you. So I've got a question here from, I think it was Ella again. Where were these studies conducted, American populations or not? This was, Dora, the Nature study.
That was also a global study. I think it was predominantly, I can look it up really quickly. I think it's Singapore as well. So I just look it up. I'll be back with an answer in a minute.
Yeah, okay. And is there a scope to look at things that have also helped students cope with the pandemic?
Do you mean measures of resilience in that sense?
Probably, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the positive side, basically, do we know about what it was positively, affecting people or being able to cope? So perhaps something around our coping variables.
Yeah, some items of how well they cope. We could look at these items individually and see what works best, what as part of an intervention, let's say, which of these coping skills actually decrease the levels of depression, anxiety, and stress in our sample.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think other studies, like our colleagues at King's University, Byron and her team have found similar results pre-COVID. And in fact, the social factors are huge. We're looking at the qualitative data at the moment of this the 3 waves. We haven't got the answers yet, but there's a lot of overlap with what they found in terms of social factors and how important it is to have this group, both family but student to student, the peer support, and also discuss pressures from supervisors. Some people felt that supervisors, even despite the sort of COVID pressures, were expecting performance to be quite high. These are things that can be negotiated, and I think we found that you can never have supervisors who don't listen to students if students have a good, confident, strong voice to actually say, this is what I'm experiencing. Can we please slow down? Can we have more meetings, etc.? We've experienced all that and had discussions with students. And in fact, I'll just tell you an anecdote from one of my students recently. I kept asking him, from 1 to 10, how do you feel today, Sajang? He was, he would say what he felt. And then one day he kind of dared to say to me, and how much from 1 to 10 do you feel today? And it was really touching because, it was finally, it was reciprocated and we were able to this is a master's students who was extremely shy and very different from our doctoral students who, we're with for a long time and tend to get quite acquainted with, isn't it, Dora and Jana? So get out there and express, basically, I think what we're all saying, the stress that you're experiencing or whatever you're experiencing, even if it's positive, express that as well, and share it with others, because this is happening to all of us. And Kerry's other talks, the data they've been sharing all kind of point to that direction, don't they, Kerry?
Firstly, thank all the speakers on the call. You did a fantastic job. I thought loads of great questions, and I think people are still, taking some time to come up with questions for you. I wanted to launch just a feedback poll for everyone who's currently on the call, just to let us know what's working, what's not, what have you enjoyed. So if you can take a couple minutes just to answer that, and we will continue to take questions up until 6:30 for another 15 minutes or so. So feel free to pop your questions or even unmute or talk to our speakers. We'd love to see your faces as well, as I'm sure is the case for everyone else on the panel.
Kerry, maybe this is one for you. Would it be great to compare the findings with the mental health of different professionals or workplaces during COVID? You may have some data on that. We don't.
Yes. So in the large global COVID study, we do definitely have data on that. We did, as a result of various talks and things, look at, for example, specifically looking, obviously for this talk, it was, doctoral students compared to also other students and higher education. But we also have data looking at teachers, or educators versus those in other occupations. And again, when we look at these kind of binary groups or larger groups, we're able to actually find no differences, again, in terms of levels of anxiety, depression, stress, loneliness, and things like that. So as Maria earlier said, that there seems to be, it is true that COVID is affecting all of us. It doesn't matter really in some cases what occupation, whether you're student or not. There are various other things that are going on in the background as well that have also been impacted by COVID. So that seems to be the consensus, at least from our data at the moment. Yeah.
If you have any experiences from another part of the world that's kind of different or positive, does anybody have any positive experiences maybe? We would love to hear from you. Some people manage to stay at home and they're so happy they don't have to commute to work. I know some of my colleagues are. A lot of people were able to spend more time with their children, which would not have happened otherwise, especially if they were just born, or the new mothers and so on, colleagues of mine who actually managed to stay longer. So there were some positive benefits there. So curious about something. What are your intuitions about longitudinal studies, which look at mental health in students throughout their university careers? This is a very, very good question. And as I said, the mental health group at King's have been looking at that, longitudinal studies. So I can point to you at Byron et al. They've been doing it for a long time, at least the last 5 years. And there's an Australian study that did longitudinal studies as well, and one in Switzerland. So there has been work that looked at that even before COVID. So I suppose what we're saying here is that university students, or in generally, being in universities, is a kind of a high pressured environment, and the mental health of students has been studied and has been at the forefront of our concern research-wise, and of course now also taking measures to do something about it. So this is, it's quite. People also put that they're a bit overwhelmed, as I will be working part-time along with my PhD. Absolutely, working and doing the PhD is hard. However, it is still harder when you're full-time and alone. So maybe working part-time, it means you have more contact with people. So see the other side as well. And I think that definitely helps to have some of the positive experiences. And that's Tracy Liu says, I did have some positive experience. So great.
Oh, hi.
Hi,
I'm a
Tracy.
PhD student from UCL. And yeah, because of the pandemic, I can't go back home to China. And so basically experience everything from the start of the pandemic. And from this April, I joined like the part-time job organized by UCL. It's a Keep in Touch campaign. It's basically we literally call students, like PhD students in UCL, and we ask them, how's everything going? Is there anything that you think may impact on your study that UCL can help with? So, and a lot of students said it's quite like personal, as they feel so like grateful, or like someone from UCL calling them. I mean, we can't help them with their like problem, but it makes them feel better, and somehow it's make me feel better. So it's part of like the positive experience I've been in this year.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's so lovely that you made a positive thing out of the pandemic, and you took something away for you also personally, and made someone else, or you're making a big impact on everyone's life. It's amazing.
Thank you for sharing, Tracy. That's really nice. And it's good to know that students at UCL are sort of starting to, well, not starting, it has been supporting each other and having other coping strategies. Laura is asking, how are these results being shared? Is there an effort to share these results with universities globally? Yes, so there will be a journal, and Carrie is putting together some papers within these talks, and she'll tell you about it. And also we are continuing with our Better Together project. So the website that we've given you, Laura, just keep looking there. We will have news there, and we are hoping to reach other universities, teams that deal with the same issues to put together possibly another conference or another day like today, so we can share all our stories.
Yeah, and Laura, just to come in here, thanks for your suggestion. Maybe if you have any suggestions or better ways that we should be disseminating and sharing our findings, do pop it into the chat too. We'd love to get suggestions. In terms of kind of just sharing our findings from the global study more widely, we've all been engaged in various sorts of things, and anything from podcasts to webinars to conference presentations, the usual academic side, but also contributing directly to policy briefs and whatnot as well. So we are all, I guess the pandemic for all of us has been an especially busy time also in this aspect, given that we're researching this area that we're so also fascinated about. But yeah, if you have other suggestions of things we should be doing, or you want to invite us to give talks, we'd love to take on your offer as well. So thanks for that.
Thank you to Dora and Jana for presenting this, and Vasilis for doing all the work. Not just behind the scenes. I know you're very active part of this, and you're presenting some of this data in a conference in a month at the ISA conference at IOE.
Thanks for all of your great questions, and we look forward to seeing you maybe a final time in 2 weeks' time. But yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us today and the opportunity to present some of our results of our study with you. It was great.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure to share some of the findings.
Fantastic.
Thanks, everybody, and have a good end of day, evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye.